We have our first two keynote speakers that I'm delighted to introduce to you today. Our first is Gavin Dykes, who was originally a civil engineer, but then he went into higher education and working with governments as an independent consultant for teaching and learning in education. He's now an advisor working with very many agencies and industries, including Learnovate, who will be here tonight as well, working in Dublin with Trinity. Among his very many worthy education roles, and I'm only going to list three of them here: Programme Director for the Education World Forum, which is an annual meeting of education ministers from all over the world. He's a Programme Director for the Asian Summit on Education, and also is a visiting scholar for the Quaglia Institute of Student Aspirations. I've really enjoyed speaking with him earlier today, and I'm sure he's going to have plenty of insights for us tonight. So if we could firstly welcome our first keynote speaker, Gavin Dykes. And with him is his colleague Keith Krueger, who's CEO of the Consortium for School Networking. It's a non-profit organisation serving K-12 school system, and I didn't actually ask the K-12, but he might give us a conversion for our own secondary school students. In 2008, he was selected by eSchool News as one of the 10 people who've had a profound impact on educational technology over the last 10 years. He's got a global reputation as a leader in bringing technology into teaching and learning, and both Keith and Gavin are going to speak to us now about growing the network here in Ireland. So please also welcome Keith Krueger.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Evie.
Good to meet you.
So it's over to you first, Keith, I think.
Okay,
you're in control.
Okay,
Have you got the clicker?
The clicker, we can get that too. So I think we decided that we're actually not doing a keynote, right?
Well, it's a different kind of a keynote.
We're doing a frick and frack?
That kind of thing we do.
Okay.
Is that what you say in America?
We do say that in America.
Fair enough.
We do. So we have a picture here of the American Revolution, and I thought we thought that this might be, what is it that we need to talk to people who are on the front lines heading into battle?
I worry about the picture of the battle slightly.
Okay.
And I'm not worried about the American Revolution. That's fine, you can go ahead with that. But I think over to the first
Very good.
of these. So the first thing I wanted to mention was something about conservatism. So if we're revolutionaries and we're really pushing on the revolutionary side, I think we also have to beware of the conservatism that lies within us all. So I have a little story about this. One of the jobs I at one stage had was to work with the Innovation Unit, which was part of the government in England. And in the role of one of the projects within the Innovation Unit was something called Power to Innovate. And it was a piece of legislation that allowed teachers or head teachers to apply to the Minister of Education to have education law suspended for a period of up to 3 years. That's quite unusual to have law suspended for a citizen of the country. It was on the basis, of course, of that piece of law getting in the way of their students' success. The interesting thing here, and really the point I want to make here, is that 90% of the applications, that's a figure that I've generally been given, were entirely unnecessary. So people thought that there were things standing in the way of them innovating, and they weren't really standing in the way at all. So the Innovation Unit was able to write back to those people and say, go ahead, do it, because there was nothing there stopping them. And I think that caution is that we, if we're successful, when we get success, then we can quickly move to a situation where we see rules and regulations and things restricting us, and it might just not be the case. And I think part of the protection against that is listening to children, because actually a lot of the innovation that we might come up with is by that listening with children. I just want to kind of do another side of that. Another side of that is where we have things like Clayton Christensen's disruptive innovation. And I just would put a caution to that side. That's kind of like another end of this, the other end of the spectrum, where you do things which break down this and really knock down what has gone before. Disruptive innovation was really designed around industry, where a few companies might fail and fall, but new ones would come up and take their place. And I think there's a caution there that I see growing when we think about education, because we shouldn't be so disrupting our schools and our children's lives that they are knocked back and then it would take them individually a long time to recover. So we need to be somewhere in the middle, which is probably somewhere where we're not overdoing the conservatism, we're not overdoing the disruption, but what we're doing is disciplined innovation, which takes us forward, which is sustainable, which will bite, and which will get the stickiness that really causes our system to change.
Great. Well, that's really helpful, and especially on this election day, you're not talking about a particular party, but rather a culture.
Yeah, absolutely. Culture eats strategy for breakfast, I think.
So we're going to alternate back and forth with a couple of do's and a couple of don'ts. For those of you who, I guess I should answer your question of who COSIN represents. So it's the primary and secondary technology leaders. We call it K-12 for kindergarten through 12th grade. You call it primary and secondary, it's the same thing. So we've been at it for about 24 years, almost a quarter of a century, getting the revolutionaries embedded within the system and trying to move it along. And I think one of the big do's is, or it could be a don't, depending on how you want to phrase it, is leading with what you want to, what the learning looks like and how you talk about it to others. I'm kind of curious in the audience, how many of you would say you're an early adopter of technology by show of hands? Okay, how many of you would say you're in the middle? Okay, and how many of you would say you're a late adopter of technology? Oh, there's one in here. Okay, everybody else is down at Temple Bar. They're all having, so what I want to say is this audience is probably disproportionately early adopters or the early part of the middle. And so the way in which we talk about it will have a big impact on whether or not it scales beyond you, or whether it scales beyond your department, or whether it scales beyond your school. And in the United States, I see a lot of problems where the head of the school says, we're going to do a one-to-one initiative. And sometimes they say a specific technology. We're going to do a laptop or a tablet. Or they may even name a particular vendor. We're going to do an iPad initiative. We're going to do a Chromebook or whatever. It's what I call the Best Buy. In the United States, we have these stores called Best Buy, and they sell technology. And so it focuses all on the technology. What we really want to focus on is the learning. And the reason that I think this is so important is that, well, what do we even mean by technology? And I'm sure that the students that were here earlier today don't think of a lot of this stuff as technology. They just think about it as life. And so how do we use that technology to really make a difference? And I think unless you start with that right question, it is an important question to say which technology solves the problem you're trying to solve in the right way. So again, like Gavin was saying, it's a nuanced. I'm not saying that the device or the form or function doesn't matter. But in fact, you have to start first with what problem are we trying to solve?
Absolutely. And I think that just takes us neatly into the next one, which is learner voice. I think one of the critical things that we need is agency from our students, or allow our students agency. And technology is one of the great ways in which we can do that. Partly because, as I think many of us will have already found, partly as has been said and it's been demonstrated today at Excited, the skills and the enterprise of students as they work with technology are a great way to actually get to grips with it and take it forward. My work's been with the Quigley Institute of Student Aspirations, a lot of the student voice stuff. I want to quote from a book called Learner Voice, The Instrument of Change, which really came out of there. Teachers who care don't try to form you as a person or force you in a direction. They guide you and respect you as you are. They find your history and struggles and to find out how they can help you. It's specific to who you are and not just a template of what they force on everyone. That was by a year 10 student, and I think was great, because if you open out the possibilities of how they can change their circumstances, if you look at how you can support their aspirations, and you can do that in part through technology, then you will get their agency, and you will get traction in their learning and their engagement, and I think it's really important. And I tie that together very briefly with, I could tie it with many different things, but I I think of Tom Friedman's article last year. I don't know if you saw it, but how to get a job at Google. How many people saw that? You know what? The simple answer is search, I think, but that's trivial. That's a joke. But the how to get a job at Google, he researched this, and it was a New York Times article, and he describes 5 requirements. And the 5 requirements, he says good grades don't hurt, but Google has its eyes on more. You need general cognitive ability, the ability to think on the fly, to learn how to learn, and to learn how to learn quickly. So if you get a new situation that you find yourself in, you can pick up what's going on quickly, and you can work out what you should be doing next. Emergent leadership is the next thing. That's not a badge saying prefect. That's being able to step in and show leadership when there's a moment that you understand what's going on. You can step in and share your ideas of how to take things forward. The third one is intellectual humility, and I personally just love intellectual humility. Instead of saying, oh, I know this, you can keep quiet. Intellectual humility is also the ability to listen, to share, and to work together. But if you don't have intellectual humility, you are resistant to new ideas coming in. I think this could be good for every one of us. It certainly could be good for me. Fourth one is ownership. And ownership is about, if you're working in a company and somebody phones up and says, look, I've got a complaint about what you're doing, and you don't say, well, the person who deals with complaints isn't in now, so can you bring back tomorrow? You take ownership of that situation. You take responsibility. And this is also in a school situation about allowing people to take responsibility, not taking it away from people, but giving responsibility. And I think that gives us better. The last of these is expertise. And expertise is the one we teach, I think, mainly. So actually developing these skills as we go forward, I think, is a fundamental way of developing working with student aspirations, developing student voice, and having an impact on your work in the school.
And Gavin, I think about Michael Fullen spoke at our conference. He's the Canadian education guru, yes. And he talks about how satisfaction by students by grade level, we start off really well, like 96% of kids say they're highly engaged and love school when kindergarten. By the time you get to high school, we're lucky if it's 40%. It's a huge, steep...
And I just add in one other comment on this. Howard Rheingold's another person who's written along these things. And Howard Rheingold was talking just a week or so ago. And he was saying about, in the past, it was the writers who needed to make sure they got the facts right and had the skills of being able to filter out and just say what was what. Now, I searched for Dublin Castle on Google a couple of days ago. It gave me 7.3 million results in 0.4 seconds, which was really useful. It's now the person who's searching, the student, who needs to have the skills of filtering, working out what's valid, what's relevant, what's useful. So actually those skills that Google are talking about is relevant to the world that we're living in. And actually those are the ones that we should be, I think, growing amongst our student body.
So our last number due that we have is around learning from others. And I just want to give, there's a lot of ways that you do that. You're doing it right now by coming together. You can do it in your own school by finding other people and sharing, by creating your own community. But one of the things that I think is important, a lot of you are going to be interested in what are the new technologies that are available for learning. How many of you are aware of the Horizon report? I don't see all of your hands up. So the Horizon report started out as a higher education report on emerging technologies for learning. It started over a decade ago. And the reason it's called Horizon is that it looks in 3 horizons. This year, in the 2 to 3 year horizon, and in the 4 to 5 year horizon. And the technologies that it identifies each year, to be in the 1 year or less, you have to see that it's showing up in at least 20% of classrooms. Now, this is a group of experts from around the world. Gavin and I are involved in it, and so are maybe some of the people in the room. We're just about to come out with the 2015 one. And the interesting thing is that I see a lot of what I hear at Excited about is in fact reflecting the two big trends for this year around bring your own device and maker spaces. Seems to me those are different. Mobile technologies has been the trend for the number one trend for the last 2 or 3 years. Again, I'm not here to say that that's the answer, but rather that's a way to start a conversation of what I think is the most important question is not what's the right technology, but what does learning look like today that prepares kids for to be college, career, and life ready would be the question I would say. Maybe you'll phrase it a different way. But using something like this, then you can say, this is what a group of experts said. It's not it's not tablets that came down from heaven, but how can we use it to sort of spark a conversation?
Absolutely. Really powerful reports and useful ways of doing it. One of the things, just by the way, on those reports, which I think isn't done enough of, they're actually produced by groups of advisors. And those groups of advisors can be a community. Be interested to know what the Excited report on technology would be and how that would fit for Ireland. So what would Ireland's horizons be? Yeah. And maybe that's something that could be thought about.
We're on to
funding,
don'ts.
Money. Sorry?
We're on to don'ts.
The don't. Funding. We'll work out what I mean don't about as I speak. So I want to tell you a story about this. I worked with a conference in Qatar for a number of years and introduced a student voice part to it. One of the things was we got 30 students from around the world. These were people 18 to 24, generally speaking. And so I had this group of 30 international students, and we thought about the ways in which we might break the ice with them. There's not much ice in Qatar, actually, think about it. But there you go. And we thought, we split them into groups of 5. And the groups of 5, we challenged them with, how would you change education? So these are students coming from all different countries of the world, all different systems, and we're really trying to create the conversations so that they might learn from each other. But to give this a little edge, we said with these groups of 5, I've got different amounts of money in envelopes here for you. So I've got, 6 groups of 5. In the first envelope, there's $10,000. Not really. But in the second one, there's 100,000. It goes up by a factor of 10, up to $1 billion. So we want to come out and you choose an envelope and then go away with your group and work for an hour to come up with how you're going to change education in the world. So you can imagine, they come up, the one that gets 10,000, no, and the one that gets $1 billion, they're off and whooping and off down the hallway to the room where they're going to work. And they go away and they work for their hour and come back and do a presentation. And we had 1 or 2 dignitaries to see the presentation. And you know what happened with the presentation? You might guess what happened with the presentation. The very best presentation was by the people who had $10,000, not the people who had $1 billion. And why was that? Well, my reflection on it was, and actually I spoke to one of them again recently. This happened 3 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. Spoke to one of them recently, and they agreed. The group that had $10,000 couldn't do everything themselves. So they had to work out who they would collaborate with, who they would work with, how they would influence them. And I think as a message for the revolutionaries here, that's absolutely critical. The group with the $1 billion worked out how they would spend it. And that's a fundamentally different thing. And so my argument to you, if you have this opportunity, is always bid for $1 billion. But always behave as though you have 10,000. Because think about, what are the principles that you're really trying to achieve? Think about how you will persuade people and get people on your side, and then work that way. And I think that little, I've not wanted to do that one again because it worked so well the first time. But I'm doing it with students in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia actually, in a few months' time. So I'll report back and let you know if it still works.
Great, great. Well, and the folks in this audience are on the front edge of doing innovative things, and that's a great place to start. The willing, as we say, those that are willing to do something new, the really early adopters. But don't forget that it's not going to scale or sustain if it just sticks with the early adopters. You've got to get the buy-in of your principal. And I've put a few leaders from around it, but that's because leaders are critical in terms of making it not just you and the individual thing you're going to do in your classroom until you retire or fall over dead because we've had this hero mentality, but rather we want to make sure that it becomes part of the system. And I just think that that's really important. To be very honest, it's neither a bottom-up approach to get to innovation or a top-down. Michael Fullen calls it, let's lead from the middle. And so what I would just say at an early stage is, find other early adopters, but start recruiting those people like your teacher, your principals, and policymakers like Kieran who are going to find others.
Absolutely. So the last one is looking outward. And so I think we each have a couple of things to say on this. Looking outwards, it's been my huge privilege to work with a number of different countries in different ways in these things. And just picking out some of the things which might help specifically. At the moment, did you know Denmark is in the process of changing its teacher contracts, started in August last year. And what they are doing is allowing more time for collaboration, breaking down the walls, and the collaboration is in order to allow greater breaking down of the walls of schools so that people go out into the community and the community comes into the school. And the community, it contributes to the teaching and learning of the school. So they're seeking to change the culture of the way that things work. Denmark, at the same time, is one of those cultures where I think they have been particularly forward-thinking in their use of computing. So in Denmark, in the high-stakes exams in senior secondary schools, currently you get access to the internet. So if you have access to the internet during your high-stakes exams, what questions would you ask? Would it be the same questions as get asked now?
Not factual.
No, if you can look it up, it's not. What it has to be is things that stimulate them to go find information, to validate that information, to show that it's of value, and having validated it, then to synthesize it into compelling arguments. So it raises the stakes. It's not just memory that's being enacted here. It's actually raising the stakes, so you're doing something with the information. André Schleicher of the OECD, who some of you may know if you're interested at all in things like PISA tests and the TALIS results, Teaching and Learning International Survey, what he talks about is today it's not about the information you know, but what you do with what you know. And I think that's a really powerful thing. Two other things just very quickly. Japan, who we will have a very kind of, I don't know, maybe it's just me. I had a prejudiced view of the way things worked in Southeast Asia. Well, Japan for 10 years had half a day a week with no curriculum. So there is no curriculum. The teachers in Japan were a little bit nervous, but the ministry set this up, and this has been to allow that creative capacity to do things, projects which last a little bit longer, to work. And the final one was just as a general one about Finland. Finland, they talk about leaving room for individual creativity and greater student agency. And in Pasi Solberg's book about Finland, if you look, you'll find he talks about less is more. And that's one of the principles of the way things work there. So something from which we might all learn, I think.
Yeah, and I think of another island country, Singapore, which Singapore, in the 1970s was in the lowest quarter of countries. And in fact, they were both their GDP and their educational output was comparable to Jamaica. They decided that the only real natural asset that Singapore had were their people. And so they've made education the heart of what they're doing. And you can see that they have exponentially, their GDP has gone up like this. Jamaica decided their focus was going to be on tourism, which has gone up. but at a much, much lower rate. And one of the things that I've had the pleasure of going to Singapore several times, and we just took a delegation there. And I think what the Americans that went to visit Singapore saw that although it's a small country and everyone knows each other relatively, they look outward. They know what's going on in the United States. They look at what's happening in Europe. They look at what's going on in Australia. They in fact encourage their principals to go to other conferences. They encourage their teachers to apply for support. They find ways to connect virtually or other ways. So they are outwardly looking even as they're inwardly changing. And maybe that's enough to get us going, but so these are our revolutionary do's and don'ts, and I guess maybe we want to bring up and have a conversation. But
just as you're doing that, as people are coming, I'd like to say I did look up and Google do's and don'ts and where the apostrophes should be. And on balance, they said this is the right way, but I still worry about it.
And I think of the American educational reformer from 100 years ago, Thomas Dewey, who said, if we're preparing if we're teaching like we did yesterday, we're not preparing kids for tomorrow.
Absolutely.
So,
Thank you.